He's a cutie patootie.
Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. She's a Californian like me. We're talking the pre-show, a lot about kind of West Coast stuff and the beauties of her hometown, San Diego. Her name is Cathy Scott. She just published a book. If you're watching this on YouTube, X, Rumble, or Substack, you'll see the full title is The First Lady of Murder, Anne Rule's Life, Legacy, and the Serial Killer She Called Friend. A really unbelievable story. It's hard to believe that her life kind of intersected with a notorious serial killer who we'll talk about, but it actually has happened to other people. This Kate Ramsland and the guy who was involved with the Moscow Four. I can't remember his name right now, but like there's kind of curious intersections between these lives. But Anne Rule is really famous. I didn't know how many books she published. It's over 20.
It's 37. 37
incredible.
books and 35 New York Times bestsellers. But her first book, The Stranger Beside Me, about Ted Bundy, was not a bestseller. It took her to get to 5 or 6, I think it was number 5, when she wrote about the Diane Downs murder and those her trying to kill her 3 children successfully with one. And that book became a bestseller, and then all the other books one by one slowly. But yeah, serial killer book was a slow process, but it did it. And then after that, everything was a bestseller.
Right, and it's interesting too because she kind of perceived what was happening in the true crime genre, where some of these serial killers become almost memorialized in a way that distorts the reality of their crime and their victims too. The victims of these serial killers who have truly horrible lives and endured horrible stuff. But Cathy, this is not her first book. She has written 13 books. Maybe this is the 14th. She's had her articles appear in Time Life, New York Times Magazine, Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Reuters, and Las Vegas Sun. She's covered crime and the military, Los Angeles riots to New Orleans, leans to cover Hurricane Katrina. But she's maybe best known as publishing 2 books, The Killing of Tupac Shakur and Murder of a Mafia Daughter, but also another one about Biggie Smalls. And she's been on TV, on Dr. Oz, Dateline, and Today Show, First 48. And she is here with her dog. She has her dog, so her dog is going to kind of sit in with us, if you don't mind, and feral cat. And so there's a lot to talk about. Your career and also the life of Anne Rule. So Cathy Scott, welcome to the show. And maybe you can talk about yourself and how this project kind of got started, your career, your work leading up to the publication of First Lady of Murder, which was published in 2026.
Happy to do it, and thank you for a great introduction. I was a secretary, and I didn't get my degree until I was 38 years old. I went to college, at a junior college, for 2 years, and life gets in the way. I got married. Then I eventually became a single parent. And when my son went to college, I went back to college. And I was a young mother, long story, I won't go into it, but I got my degree when I was 38 years old. And it was because you couldn't even get an interview at a newspaper. I wanted to become a journalist. I'd always liked to write a little bit, but a couple of stories struck me. One was the USS Pueblo. I remember coming home from school and reading that every single day, the latest on it, the progression of the story each day in the San Diego Union newspaper. And I just had a bug for it. And so went back to school and took 2 night classes and took a journalism class and got enough units. And then I finished my degree and then started applying for newspapers. And I've worked for some of the smallest newspapers in Southern California, but that's how you cut your teeth as a reporter. My first crime was a DEA bust on Mission Boulevard in in North Mission Beach on the coast of San Diego near Belmont Park, if everybody knows the roller coaster there, and all these DEA, DEA yellow uh, letters on the back of the investigators' jackets and FBI, and I was hooked. And after that, all I wanted to write was crime. And then I just worked my way up. I was lucky. I got a lot of awards: San Diego Press Club, the Society of Professional Journalists, and a weekly newspaper called me and said, "We saw that you got an award, and it was Best of Show." From a teeny tiny newspaper, I got Best of Show in San Diego Press Club. And he said, "We have an opening for business editor," because he saw I was a business major. And I just did it because it was easier. and and I became the business editor there. And then from there, I moved to another daily. So I had a few lucky breaks, went to the Vista Press, a small newspaper, but a news town north of San Diego, and got the notice of some people. And then I applied for jobs, and Las Vegas Sun offered me a crime beat, and I took it. And Vegas is a news town. So, 3 years later, Tupac Shakur died on my watch, and the cops weren't solving it. And that's the reason I wrote the book. Had all these entertainment reporters out of New York, out of New York, contacting me and saying, "Somebody's got to write a book about him, and you're the one to do it." And so I did, and I
That was
got
96, right? So that was 30 years ago. Wow.
I died in 96, and I wrote the book and finished the book in 97, and September of 96 he died, and it became Los Angeles Times bestseller. I was out of a very small press, and Huntington Press, which they were at the time, that all they published was gambling books. And so it's amazing. Out of there, I got a bestseller, and that put them on the bank on the map, really. And there's still a thriving publishing house that does true crime and everything else now. So it's amazing how one thing you do leads to steps and other things. And then when I was working at the Los Angeles, the Las Vegas Sun, a call came in from an editor at the New York Times about a train wreck that was between Las Vegas, between Arizona and Nevada, and would I cover it? So I went to my editor and said, "Can I go cover this for the Times? And I'll cover it, give a different story, a different take on it for you." And that began 11 years as the Nevada correspondent for the New York Times. So I got some lucky breaks. I didn't go get amazing. That. But I produced for them. And and that helped me, I think, in my career a lot. But I worked hard, I was writing all the time, and then I stayed in Vegas, I think, too long, but and
we all do, actually. So if you're comfortable, everybody who stays in Vegas always says they stay.
Well, I had a house
whether
there,
it's 3 days or 10 years.
Yeah. I wanted to get back to my hometown. I'm born and raised in San Diego. But I spent 4.5 months in New Orleans, because of Hurricane Katrina. They sent me there for 2.5 weeks. I was teaching at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, 4 classes, journalism classes a week. So I got a sub, and I went to New Orleans for 2.5 weeks, and I stayed 4.5 months, gave up my teaching position to stay, and that book became Paw Prints of Katrina. It was hard to leave, but I was in boats on the clay, on the ground, everything, pulling cats and dogs, and I was writing about it, but I was also out there in the field actually doing it. It was quite a moment in time, and it's just interesting. I could have said no when they invited me to go, and a large rescue group, and I went, and it's amazing. And then somebody said, "Well, you're writing dog books now?" So I did Unconditional Honor, Wounded Warriors and Their Dogs, with a photographer who used to be a Marine. And I swore that would be my last dog book, but it didn't hurt my career crime-wise, so I was lucky. and rule, especially like that I,
And that's like real
yeah.
immersion journalism, like you mentioned that term in this book. So you were, I mean, 1,500 people died and massive damage. I mean, it was like if there was like a water version of a nuclear bomb. That's what happened in New Orleans, right?
Yeah, nobody was helping them. It was the
Yeah.
saddest thing. I mean, I went down to the bayou. We went everywhere. I mean, we were in boats. We were on foot. You know, we saw some horrendous things where horses couldn't get out of their stalls, so of course they died. And it was really awful to see and bodies, people out there, and it just I just couldn't see myself leaving. And so I told the stories, but about the animals and the people and what some of them, all they wanted back were their pets. You know, that was all they just, and they'd come to the center and go through the stalls. It was just a makeshift out on a green pasture, you know, with a couple of stick buildings. I slept on the floor of one with my little Chihuahua rescue who came out of the water too. And she came home with me. We couldn't find her owner, but all they wanted was their dogs and cats. And I think we placed, when we were down there, I think we placed 7,000 back to their homes, you know, and we got about, I think, double that out of there. So it was a remarkable moment in time, really, and I'm proud to have been there. And you know, you have to kind of take things as they come along, and people are, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I just did it, and I'm real happy I did.
It's a really incredible historical event. I think they were maybe even till this day, they're still kind of repairing the city from it. Um, and then from there, you kind of have done some other stuff. Like one of your more popular books is your book you did about Rick Ross, right?
Yeah, Freeway Rick Ross, his handlers, I call them, came to me about him. I barely knew about him. You know, I knew who he was. He was the drug kingpin. He's the one who came up with crack, you know. And I got to know him. I went out there, and he gave me a tour of Compton, you know. And he's a good guy, and he made terrible mistakes, and he knows it, but he couldn't read or write. And when he went to jail for cocaine possession or whatever it was, selling, he taught himself how to write. And some of the inmates, he was right in the federal courthouse or federal prison in downtown San Diego. And he went to the law library and had some inmates help him. They made flashcards, and he taught himself how to read and write. And he goes and he speaks, and he apologizes, but he goes and he speaks all over the country. And so I checked him out. They came to see me. Then I met Rick, and I did it. And so that was a work for hire. It was an autobiography. And so they paid me to, and then I didn't have to worry about publishing. They went out and got it published. But I think it's my first work for hire. I don't do that sort of thing. But it was a good story, and I think his story needed to be told. You know, he was a star tennis player in high school in Compton, and they just pushed him through the system. He couldn't read or write. Got LA, school district without reading and writing. He got a full ride at Santa Barbara. He went up to UC Santa Barbara to start school and talked to an advisor, and he learned that he couldn't read or write, and they just killed the deal, and he went back to Compton.
Wow.
You know,
So
so it's
even
amazing.
got into college. Wow.
Yeah, well, he didn't go because they learned he couldn't. My thing is, why didn't they just teach him? You know, but they didn't, and they let him go. And but yeah, so that's why he got into the business he got in. He couldn't even work at Jack in the Box because he couldn't read. So that was it. That was his choice, and he knows it was a bad one, and he's been trying to make up for it ever since.
He did serve his time. How long was he in jail for?
14 years, and he got an early release, but I forget, it was 21 years or something. But the judge who actually gave him his sentence, and sent him away was a federal judge. She was the one who gave him early time off, and he got out at 14 years. So he served his time, and he's probably better for it.
But it was during that crack epidemic, right? Like, it was
Oh
like
yeah.
the late 80s, early 90s, I think.
Well, yeah, and he's the cause of the epidemic. He was the one making it. He had houses, they were storing everything. He was employing everybody around. But he also, baby mamas, there were crack babies, and he knows that he was the cause of it, and he felt bad about it, and he really is a nice person. But there are people who don't think he is, but you get to know him, and so he bought some of those women. He bought them houses. There were people, because he had money coming in right and left, so he was helping his neighborhood while he employed them all, but it was all drugs. But then afterward, now he speaks all over the country. He goes to prisons and speaks. He goes to universities. He's on the speaking tour, and has been for a long time. I hear from him now and then, so we catch up.
Yeah, and so you've had these kind of personal connections to a lot of these people. The other interesting story is the run you wrote about the Binion family too, right? The death of that, was it the son, or was it the actual?
It's,
I
yeah,
think it was
no, it
Binion
was,
himself, wasn't it?
yeah, no, yeah, it was the son,
Son, yeah.
and yeah, and they didn't want his girlfriend to have, yeah, it's a Binion thing, Ted Binion, Benny Binion, right? That's his father's name, but they're storied, of course, with Binion's Horseshoe and Casino there, and they were the last straw floor, straw all over the dirt floor.
Right.
They were the last one in downtown Las Vegas, and it was, I sat through the first trial, and Sandy Murphy was accused of murder. She was his living girlfriend. She did not kill him. He died of a self-induced drug overdose accidentally. She found the body, of course, because she lived with him, and the family didn't want her to get, he left her $300,000 and his house, a ranch style house, and real close to downtown Las Vegas, one of the early houses there, and they didn't want her to get anything, and they found they actually took a ex-homicide cop, and he was the one who investigated the case, and they just threw the book at her and took her 2 trials, and I was at both of them. In the second one, she just broke down at the time, and she and her boyfriend after Ted, they, well, kind of during Ted too, she leaned on him quite a lot, because Ted was a drug user, and it was so awful to be around. But jury found her innocent, and she lives in, I believe she's at a beach community in Southern California, and is doing very well. Married a gallery owner, artist, and she runs a gallery, and has children, and is doing very, very well. But she was in her 20s. And I interviewed her several times during it, before the trial, the first trial. And so I'm glad she was exonerated. There are people in town who still think she was guilty, but she wasn't.
Wasn't that the famous case where they tried to
Mm,
find his silver stash in the desert and
yeah.
were digging
Oh,
up
yeah.
out there?
Ted Binion liked to bury things, and he had had so much silver at the horseshoe that he needed to put it somewhere, and he had it in a safe, a big safe. So he had a safe, an underground safe. It wasn't in dirt, but it was an underground safe built, and put it in there. And it's a long story. I won't go into all of it, but they accused her of trying to steal it, but it they tried to move it to get it onto his property. It was on the side of the highway in Pahrump Dump,
Right.
Nevada. Yeah, on the sideway of that little town. I don't know what Pahrump's like right now, but and so she just wanted it to go to his property, and that's what they were going to move it. And then they accused her of stealing it, and that's how that all came about.
That was that story. I just remember that being in the news. But his dad was really one of the early kind of gamblers, the Dixie Mafia type, right, from Texas, if I remember
Oh,
right.
Benny Binion,
Yeah,
yes,
really
sirree. Yeah, he
character.
was a diehard. Yeah, well, they all, Susan Berman. I wrote A Murder of a Mafia Daughter, and her dad, Davy Berman was a mobster out of Kansas City, was it Cincinnati? One of those. And it's been a while since I've looked at that book, but um, she was a poor little rich girl living in in Las Vegas, and her dad died when she was 12 years old. But he was a right hand man to Lansky, Meyer, all those guys. I mean, you have all these mobsters out there at the time. Bugsy Siegel, her dad took over from Bugsy Siegel when he was, when he after his demise. Her dad is the one who took over. So it's interesting because I love covering the mafia, but I was able to cover that story. I was able to cover, there was a little bit of mafia involved in the Binion story. So, and then Fat Herbie Blitzstein, who was Tony Spilatro's main hand, right hand man, he was best friends. Fat Herbie Blitzstein was best friends with Binion. So that's one of my next books coming up. I've started it. So
Oh, interesting. That's an interesting tie. And
Fat Herbie.
Spilotro was like at the Circus, like he worked the trinket booth or something. That was
Oh
his
yeah,
cover there. Yeah,
no, it's the cover, and then of course he had a back room where they counted all their money. So
right.
here's one for the casino, here's two for us, here's one for, yeah. They were slush funding. They were it was called the skim,
Skim.
and
Yeah,
so yeah, and so that was just and Ted and Fat Herbie got killed because the mafia came in and uh, tried to take over his rackets, and that's why they killed him, was take over his rackets. It's funny though about I love covering the mafia. They're just people, happen to do what they're doing, and they're colorful. I've met several of them and hung out a bit, and it's so funny because Anne Rule said she was afraid of the mafia. She would never write about the mafia. So it was rather, of course, there was no mafia up in Seattle, but she didn't want to cover anything to do with the mafia. But it's no different from any other crime. It's just organized. A lot of the rest of it is disorganized.
right. Sometimes they like to be written about. Like sometimes, like when they heard that Goodfellas was being made, some of those mafia people were like, "Oh, really? Robert De Niro's going to be in this?" Like, wow. So, like, it's an odd thing. They kind of like the notoriety. They're not offended by. So, you've covered some of these other great true crime stories. And how did this one? How did like a biography of Anne Rule materialize?
Well, I got to know her in the last 3 years of her life, and one of her attorneys contacted me and there was a headline that called Anne's writing sloppy reporting. She wasn't a reporter. She wasn't a journalist. She came from the tabloids, but they said it was sloppy reporting, and she was very upset. And they didn't say that in the article at all, but she wanted to set the record straight, and she didn't feel the reporting was balanced. And so her attorney came to me. I had called her in 97. Well, it was on AOL chat rooms, I think, because it was my first book I was writing in 96. Probably I contacted her. So we did have contact then, went back and forth a few times. So I did meet her online in 96. And then they contacted me, and then I interviewed her and talked to her, and ended up writing 3 stories about her. And I think 1 or 2 was about the lawsuit, but come here. But the other was just about her and her writing, or Ted Bundy, whatever it was. And we became friends, and we talked. She'd call me, I'd call her, and we talked to each other a lot. She called me her dog loving friend, because one time she had, I think when she died, she had 5 cats. She only had one or 2 dogs when she died, but she was up to about 4 or 5 dogs and 6 or 7 cats somewhere outside. And yeah, so we had that in common. But also we talked about writing, we talked about stories, we talked about books. Then I learned some things about her after I wrote my first article, and some journalists. You read the book, right?
I skimmed through it. Yes, definitely.
So I don't know if you saw remarks by fellow authors.
I don't recall those. No.
Yeah, so that was what they said. You've got to talk to so and so. Got to talk to so and so. You got to. This is what she did to this person, and she could be. She could be. She was just had the sweetest personality. She could be so giving and so nice, but boy, when it came to competition, and if she thought a writer was coming onto her turf, which I don't look at her turf. Though I don't know how many Tupac books are out. I did the first one, but I could care less how many are out. But or Susan Berman for that matter, Mafia Daughter
Yeah, the
Susan.
Robert Durst stories all over the place.
Yeah, that one was a big one. Yeah, and I covered that all the way to the end, which I'm happy to. I did 3 editions and finally put that he died. Plus, he was convicted before he died. Thank goodness. But yeah, and so I'm not competitive that way. So I started asking her a little bit about that, and then once she died, even more people came out. There was one guy who said, "I'm not going to talk about her while she's alive," and I didn't at that point plan on writing a book. I found it interesting, the story, but once she died, and then these other people, he said, "I will talk to you now," because he was afraid she'd come after him, write something about him, and that was so. And I learned some other things, and I thought, okay, there's more than meets the eye. So what I tried to do was not do the negative on her, but just tell the whole story. She was so multifaceted and so talented in her own right. And she paved, she was a crusader. She paved the way for women. She was one of the first. Edna Buchanan was a Miami, one of the first really top true crime writers, but she had the crime beat in Miami. I read her book before I read Anne's, and so she sort of paved the way. But Anne, as an author, she really paved the way for women to write true crime, and I am here because of Anne. She paved the way for the rest of us, and to her, I'm grateful for that.
You also dedicated the book to a guy I had on my show 3 times, Dennis McDougal, who tragically passed away last year in a
Uh,
auto accident.
he
But I
had a
had
bad
him on.
run in, yeah, he had a bad run in with her, with Anne.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
he was. I talked to him. He called me a week or two before it was 2 weeks before he left from Tennessee. We were supposed to meet in Palm Desert. I live in the mountains just above Palm Desert, and so he was very excited. He called me a bunch of times. He was so excited about the book, and he met her. He called her and had a very bad experience, and it's in the book. I'll let everybody read it. But Dennis was such a good guy. And, he was a reporter at the Los Angeles Times covering entertainment. And he'd go to Vegas a lot to cover entertainment there. And whenever Dennis was in town, we would get together. I met him we used to have these rooms, online rooms, chat rooms, and
Sure. Yeah.
Dennis was one of the authors in them, all these true crime authors. There were probably 15 of us, and we all got to know each other just by chatting about the industry and
Oh,
what books
interesting.
and what stories. And Dennis was part of that. So I knew him, and then he contacted me. So we were buddies, and so it broke everyone's heart, mine included, when Dennis was killed in that, on what, 210 interstate, he didn't have a seatbelt on, neither did his wife, and they both died
They
when
both
they were
died. Oh, that's terrible.
slammed behind. He lived, I think she died after 1 day, and Dennis died after 2 days. It was horrible.
That's terrible. I covered his books, Operation White Rabbit and also Angel of Darkness about Randy Kraft, so people can go back and check that. So a tragic loss, and my
Tragic, yeah.
interactions with him were great too, like a nice
He was
person.
a great guy, had a good sense of humor.
So McDougal's in there, and this is her story. Like Anne Rule was, she had a college degree too, and she wanted to be in the law enforcement too, right?
Yeah, and her family, well, the first chapter is all about her, jail. Her grandfather was a sheriff, and her grandparents ran a mom and pop jail, and she'd spend summers there. So she fed the inmates and stuff, and she'd give them their trays, slick them, stick it through the slot. And so I think that's why she was never afraid of Ted. And she wasn't afraid of criminals because she was around criminals for like 5 years or however long it was every summer. And they lived in the jail. That's where you lived. And then the women's jail, there were two cells upstairs. And when she would stay the summer with her grandparents, she would go upstairs and sleep in one of the women's cells. It was hilarious. And then her grandfather was a reader of the tabloids. And that's when she first read the tabloids. When she was an avid reader from 3 years old on, and so she would read the tabloids, and she ends up writing for them for 14 years. So it was pretty amazing, everything. And then she wanted to be a police officer, but she was legally blind and couldn't pass the test. So she was on auxiliary women's, on the women's corps, if you want to call it. They had a billy club and a badge, but no gun. And she did that for 18 months. And then, so you'll see in her book, she'll say, I was a police officer. Well, it was a short time, and it wasn't a full-fledged. But she is more, she called herself more a social worker. So she had that, and so she said, well, if I can't be a cop, then I can write stories about them, and that's what she ended up doing.
And she wrote as a woman, with men's name. That's how she got started in some of these, pulp fiction, maybe pulp crime magazines. Is that
Yeah,
fair to say?
yeah, True Detective, those things, and the dime store, and that's where you get what, and Anne said it herself. I'd take the story. She'd go to the homicide unit. That's how she got to know the homicide cops so well. She'd stop by and say, "Hey, what happened?" And they give her part of a story or show her a crime report, and she'd take part of that story, and then she would finish it herself. And that's what she did for the tabloids. I don't know, some of that spilled over in her books, but that's how she learned to write. So she didn't come from journalism, she came from the tabloids. It's quite different.
But she really dedicated herself as a writer. Like, she was really she's I mean, you write in the book, she wrote every day. Like, she was that type of writer. She didn't write by inspiration. She was one of those kinda journey person writers, I guess, is what
That's
it is.
me. That's me
Yeah,
too.
for you
I
too.
get up
Well, you're lucky.
for this last book. I mean, I was writing 12 and 14 hours. You just get in the you just I treat it as a job. Like, I get up, I lay out my clothes the night before, and I get up in the morning and I get ready to go to work, and I go to a cafe and sit and write, or I'll sit and write at home. But the dogs get on my laps and stuff like that. And I'll have the news on if I'm home, so I try not to do that. But I'll sit there for 12 hours. I'll come home and write for an hour. On deadline, I wrote until 5:30 one morning, a few weeks ago for this book. And I was at my last night writing. Another one I was up till 2. I'm not young anymore. I feel very young, and I keep myself in shape, and I eat well. I do work out and that sort of thing, but I it takes me longer, to recover from that. So I'm not going to do that to myself again. So I'm on deadline for another book as well right now, but I'm real proud of how the book turned out, and I hope I did good by her. And I think uh, it was so she made such a difference in the true crime genre that a story needed to be told. But I think the full story, you give the full story, and that's what I endeavored to do, and that's what I did. I interviewed about 250 people.
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of references in here, a lot of people who knew her, and actually advice on how to become a good writer at the very end. So if
Yeah,
you
I thought
need
that
some
was
tips,
yeah, I thought that was important.
I think it's important too. I mean, I think it's like it's a great career. I mean, she left a pretty sizable estate when she passed away, but she had kind of a tragedy in her life that led her to a suicide hotline, right?
Yes, her brother Don died when he was 21. She was only a year older than her brother, and he was her only sibling. And he committed suicide when he was a student at Stanford University. And that was the reason she wanted to help other people because she couldn't help her brother. And in walks almost the same time. Uh, Now, Ted wasn't a volunteer, he was on school work, and it was through the University of Washington, and he got $2 an hour to be there. And Anne was a volunteer, but it's interesting. He stayed a year, and she quit shortly after he left. I found that interesting, but yeah, she got to know him really well. Wasn't afraid of him, and then. Then the
But her
stories.
dog didn't like him, right? Or something like that.
No,
The
no, I think
dog,
that was Toby, the dog Toby. Dennett,
yeah.
yeah, and you gotta listen to your dogs. You gotta listen to them because they often
They
can
can
pick up.
smell like anger hormones and things like that that humans can't pick up on. So
Yeah.
it is interesting. He was 24 at the time. I think that you wrote that was right around the time her brother, how old her brother would have been, right? Something
Yeah,
like
and
that.
and that he reminded her of her brother, but, it's funny because Anne always called him so handsome. It's throughout her book. I didn't look at Ted Binion, but see, Vegas, the Binion family, Ted Bundy as being, uh, eh, I didn't look at him as handsome. He was n I get maybe nice, pleasant looking, but I she really just said he was so handsome and stuff, but I don't think he was. He was just typical. He smiled a lot. He had a nice smile, but kind of his eyes would crinkle up at the same time as he smiled. But I think it was kind of average looking, but on the pleasant side. But she was kind of taken by him, and I think she was 12 years older than him at the time, but she wasn't. She was kind of pudgy, she didn't exercise. I think there was a time when she did, but she just all American diet, and um, but she talked about she wanted a boyfriend, and she had one or two people over the years that she dated. And of course, she married, but that ended after a few years, for 4 kids later, um, I think that was the biggest regret of her life. But and I think Ted too. Later on, be careful what you wish for. I wish I could get in the mind of a serial killer, she always said, after she read the Capote book, and be careful what you wish for, because she certainly did. But um, it formed her, it shaped her life. I think she was happy with who she was, and she isolated herself in a house, but on Puget Sound, that was quite away from everything else. But there was a sadness about her. She was very soft spoken, but there was a sadness about her, and I think part of that was her uh, brother, of course, and then I think the fact that she was alone. She wanted to be with somebody, and she wasn't.
Her output was prodigious. Like she really kind of left her mark on the true crime genre, right?
She'd knock off toward the end. She was knocking off 2 books in 6 months apiece. She was writing nonstop, and she had kind of formulaic. If you look at her books, they're all kind of the same, different stories, but she had a formula, and she was able to go through that. I don't do that. I just take the story wherever it leads me, but it worked for her. And I'm not criticizing it. Other people do it too, but she had a formula, and it helped her. She was quite disciplined, and you have to be. And that's what I do too. I just sit down and write, you don't have to, as Anne said, you don't have to wait. And I think I put that in her tips, her writing tips. You don't have to wait for something to inspire you. Just sit down and write, and it'll come to you. And it's true.
Do you have a favorite of hers, a book of hers that's your favorite? Have you read much of her
Yeah, I've,
literature?
I've read a lot of her books. I think the book about the children. God, the chapter is named after the title of that book, Diane Down's case. And If You Really Love Me, that
If you
book.
really know.
I think that was one of her finest hour. It was so detailed, and she got into the kids, and you know exactly what happened in that case. It was so horrid, and and I think also obviously other readers felt the same because that became her first New York Times bestseller. I think the I think the I think the Stranger Beside Me, the storyline, and it was very, in a lot of ways, it was autobiographical as well. And that you do that when you're writing it. I mean, I go first person and give my opinion in it, but in my books, and the more I go along with my books, the more I do that. But I don't become part of the story. Anne obviously became part of that story because and she got criticized for it over the years, but she it's how she got the story, was by getting to know him even better. And he ended up quite disliking her quite heavily, but he's a serial killer, who cares? but but it took until she went to the trial to see the teeth prints, and that was the solid proof, and for her to finally believe it. But in a lot of ways, at times she said, well, I did believe it, I didn't. So it was really, was she hanging on because she needed him to help her write the book? Because he would have cut her off if he knew that she was criticizing him in any way. But she did it her own way, and God love her for it. She paved the path for the rest of us, and the rest is history.
Right, and Diane Downs, that was the one. She's like
Yeah,
a notorious one that, like Duper's Delight, like she's on film and stuff. Isn't that the same lady? She's from like
I think so.
Texas or something, right? Is that
Yeah,
right?
and
Yeah,
no, she was from Oregon.
Oregon. Sorry.
Then she's in prison, but Oprah and Anne and Diane Downs went on TV together, and Diane Downs
Wow.
just screamed at her on the air and stuff. You should watch it. It's quite interesting. But she really attacked Anne, but they came right back at her, Oprah especially. But it was interesting too, and I think that was her. I don't like reading about dead children, or writing about them, but at times you do. My next book is teenagers murdered on Torrey Pines Beach in San Diego, Del Mar, Torrey Pines area, La Jolla, and it's a sad story, and the way the whole thing went down, and the police aren't necessarily up to speed on letting everyone know what happened. And so that's the reason I'm writing it. I usually have a reason for, because I want to tell the whole story, and people aren't getting the whole story. And so I was just there yesterday on the beach with the brother and sister of one of the victims,
Oh wow.
interviewing them and walking to where the bodies were found.
Wow. A lot of these true
Sad
crime
story.
stories are very important because they're cautionary tales of what can happen. It's not just like these people are operating in the world, but the victims too. Like they reverberate through these families. If you lose somebody to a serial killer or a murderer or something like that, it's like a dropping a brick in a water or something like that. Like the effects are immense psychologically, and they linger forever for these people. They never really get over it, in my opinion. But
Yeah, no, they don't. The brother of one of them, he's 62 years old, and he's not over it.
yeah,
They
they
lot
study Diane down a lot in body language. So a lot of these body language YouTube channels, they always study her because she was infamous for Duper's Delight, where she would tell the story and smile. And she was like a true sociopath. It's like how to spot a sociopath. Diane Downs. I would
Yeah,
say,
when she tells her own made up story, about the kids, and yeah, she smiles a lot. It's quite well, she's a sociopath, and she's crazy, but and she doesn't know it, and so she's quite animated. It's quite yeah, it's not pleasant to watch, but
like she's willing
yeah,
to get in public in front of a camera.
yeah, in front of Oprah and Anne, that was pretty gutsy on her part. but she just likes to be in the limelight. And but I think they told it on their side. Oprah and Anne told the story pretty well, even though she was trying to yarn the story, making up. And her poor children suffered. One died and the other two suffered. Sorry.
But Anne Rule had a lot of success in her life. Like her books are made into movies, and she's on the circuit, and she's like a person who made an impact. She wasn't kind of. I mean, writing is a lonely profession in a way, but she was definitely out there in Farrah Fawcett's in her shows and all this stuff like that, right?
Yeah, she got to be on the set. Or now, speaking of Farrah Fawcett in that film, she went to the Golden Globes because the film made from that book was nominated for a Golden Globe award, and she ended up in a limousine with Faye Dunaway. I'm not going to tell the story, but it's quite a story. It's quite shocking when I found it and learned about it, and Anne was just horrified by the experience, but she still went into the Golden Globes. But it's a funny story. You got to look for it.
And she was maybe one of the early ones who had kind of a writer's fan club, or like she accrued people around her who were her fans. I don't know. Maybe it's more common now, but I don't know if it was the same way back in the day where you could have these kind of things. Would you find that statement to be true?
Yeah, I think she was one. I don't call anybody who reads my book a fan. I call them my readers. So, but Anne called them her fans, but they called themselves fans. They called themselves Anne Rule fans, ARF, Annie's Arts. So there is a chapter called Annie's Arts, and I do interview a lot of them. I've gotten to become friends with several of them. but but they adored her, and she would send cards, and when one had a baby or someone in the family died or someone was sick, she would ask if someone could go over and help that person, and she would send cards and letters and that sort of thing, and she tried to keep in touch. And she was so giving in that way. And yeah, and they named themselves, but I don't know that is typical. I think it's actually rather unusual having a fan club for readership. I think it's a little unusual.
She may have been the first kind of person of this true crime genre is the number one genre in podcasting. I think it is, but it's like she might have been one of these early aggregators of this kind of reader base, I guess, if you will,
I
for
think
that. So
so.
it's
Yeah, the
interesting.
followers. Yeah, she grew quite a. I mean, a lot of them read my books now, and the good thing is, while I tell the whole story of Anne Rule, good, bad, and different. I tell her story because I'm not going to tell a one-sided story. And there are some things I learned that I I thought, well, how can I not include it? I have I have two and three sources on it, so I went ahead and did it. But they appreciated it because they feel like that's what the notes I'm getting from them. A couple of people have called me too, her readers, and they said they didn't know that about certain things about her. And so they're so glad to learn even more because it's like they couldn't get enough of her. And now they've got more. So it is a complete biography. It is not a Killy Kelly knockoff, you know, like Sinatra and do this terrible story on him. She was a good person. She was giving. She was not flawless. None of us are. God forbid somebody ever writes about me. So but I think if you're going to tell a story, you have to tell the whole thing, and that's why I did it.
And she was also like one of the interesting thing is she was kind of because of her association with Bundy, she became kind of his expert too, in a way too, of his career to a certain extent, which is an industry in itself, like the serial killer, but particularly Ted Bundy, who I've had other authors on. She became kind of an expert about his case, right?
Yeah, she was. Yeah, she was quite an expert. She made a point of going to the trial and that sort of thing. She did not go to his when they when they killed him.
Execution, yeah.
Yeah, execution in the
In Florida, I think he was.
yeah, Florida electric chair. She didn't go. She was on 2020, and she actually said, the Tom Jarrett, is it? He practically put the microphone up her nose and wanted an instant reaction. She was sick to her stomach, and after she gave the reaction, she went up and got up from the studio and went in to use the restroom, and she vomited.
Wow.
She had made her sick, and she had the same reaction in the courtroom when she saw the evidence. And finally, even though everybody was telling her, and the cops were telling her too, because she irritated the homicide guys a little bit, but everybody was telling her he is guilty, he is guilty. And then when she saw that evidence, she did the same thing, got up from the trial, went into the restroom, and threw up. It made her sick. And so the reality of it, she cared about him, and I think it was very disappointing to her. I always felt she had a great sense of humor, and she would giggle and laugh and stuff, and she was fun to be around. She was interesting, but there was also a sadness about her. I mean, I think you can see it in her face in the book, in the photo. I think there was a gentleness about her, but she could get her dander up too. But I think she didn't get to do everything in life she wanted to do, and I think that was her disappointment at dying at 83. 83 is fairly young today to die, but she had heart disease, and that catches up with you if you don't do things to make that not happen. You know what I mean?
Yes.
She wrote a lot. She didn't exercise, and I think that catches up on you. She
Yeah.
wasn't a smoker or anything.
Right. So we were talking the pre-show. It's good for you. You get out and walk around a lot. I
Well,
live
I
a sedentary life as a semi-writer, but as a podcaster. So I try to get out and walk too. So it's a message to
Yeah.
everybody.
When I work, you got to work out too. You got to lift weights, or you've got to lift something. I go out and I do a lot of Tai Chi, but I roll boulders on my property. I cut trees. I do all kinds of stuff. So I'm out there all the time, like, because I live in the mountains. So it's really a workout for me when I go outside and work in the yard, and then I go to the gym,
Good
and
for
I
you.
work out. Yeah, and I walk, and starting to jog a little bit again.
Good for you. There's a lot more in this book. She lived a full life. I mean, 83 is young, but she put the output's incredible, and the topic she talked about and all the stuff is covered is kind of like a catalog of a lot of true crime. So she really was one of the trailblazers in that regard, I would say. Is there
She
anything
was.
else? Yeah. Is there anything? And rest in peace, Dennis McDougal. Check out his books. He's written great books about Wasserman. Um, I guess I wonder if the book did he finish that book that he was doing about Steve Wynn? I don't know. Is that
Steve, he finally got a no, no, Steve Wynn, I believe that book came out, didn't it?
oh it did I
Yes, it
must
did.
have okay.
I
I
believe
just
that
have to
came out.
follow up. I have to
I
catch up.
lived in Vegas, and Steve Wynn, thank goodness he wasn't on my beat, but I know that Jeff Garman, the journalist who was murdered in Las Vegas, Jeff and I worked at the same paper for several years, and he was a friend. And boy, Steve would threaten him, with everything. So that writing about Steve Wynn was very gutsy on Dennis's part, because they said, "Are you sure he's going to come after you? Are you sure you want to do this?" But he did, and I don't think he got much ramification afterward from it. And took him a while to get a publisher, because nobody wants to publish it because they think Steve Wynn's going to sue, and he didn't, which was, but he was working on what case was he? He was working on a new case, and it was a crime case. I believe that's what Dennis was working on. And I don't know if
Interesting.
his sister, I believe, got all his papers and everything, but I don't know if one of his kids or somebody wants to try to finish one of his books, but we'll see what happens. He had lots of friends in the true crime industry, so maybe somebody will pick up the mantle and do that for him. But I
I
think,
hope so.
on leaving, and I think we should, accept people for who they are, and she was a remarkable person and paved the way for others, And like I said, I'm here because of her, and I'm grateful too for it. And I appreciated her friendship. She probably wouldn't agree with the book, but it I think it was an important story to tell, and not just a one-off, but to tell the true story, because she was so big and so popular, to actually get into nearly every facet of her life and be able to tell the full, complete story of Anne Rule was really a pleasure for me to do, and and I'm there I'm grateful to her for paving the way for me to be able to do that.
Yeah, and the book is out June, I think, on Amazon June 9th, 2026 too. So it is available right now, correct?
Yeah, paperback, hardback, the
Kindle.
ebook, and then the audiobook any minute now. Any minute now. I was a
Audio.
little late and they were on me, and I gave myself a couple more days to work on the book. There are a few typos in it I'm not happy with, but it is what it is. And nobody are perfect, as my mother used to say. So, my mother she wrote a book, by the way, and so did my dad. So my
Interesting.
grandfather wrote for Popular Mechanics for years.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I used to be at their summer house in Carmel watching him type up his articles. So I don't know if that had an impact on me or not to become a journalist, but it is what it is.
Maybe it is. Maybe it's this kind of seedling that Anne Rule had, where she was with her grandfather in jail, and then she goes to college. And these things sometimes these if the output 40 years later is books. Like I never thought I'd be an author, and I just read a lot. Next thing I knew, I'm writing books. So um, the best place
And
to contact. Pardon?
once you do it, you're stuck.
Yeah, yeah. It's really satisfying. It's very satisfying to complete a project. It's not just like brag. It's just something that you complete, and it influences the culture and people understand it. Seeing it kind of spread out into the zeitgeist and stuff is, especially if you like the topic and or you have something different to say than other people, it's very satisfying. Yeah.
It is.
And the best place to reach you is at your website, which is kathyscott.com, right?
Yeah, so if they can Facebook me, Cathy Scott 10, Cathy Scott 10, can always message me. I get a lot of messages through Facebook.
Facebook. I'll put a link to your Facebook page, your website. You have a lot of stuff on there, your books, appearances, articles, contact. So that's another way to see that. And your other books. Like there's a lot of a lot of these things when people put out a book, people go back and read your earlier books, which is what they should do. We talked about those earlier in this
Yeah.
discussion.
And I do write for Psychology Today too. There's
Gosh,
a
it's so
good
sad.
review on Psychology Today by Catherine Ramsland.
Oh, nice.
She wrote a wonderful, very in-depth piece on the book.
Oh,
So
interesting.
that's out there too. But I do write for Psychology Today
That's great. And
periodically.
Ramsland was kind of her claim to fame might be BTK killer, right? I think she wrote a
Yeah,
very
but she's the psychologist who was the advisor for the shooter in Idaho. When you mentioned that, that
right.
was Catherine Ramsland. She was at the my brother was at the University of Idaho and lives in Moscow, Idaho, where they were killed. And but Catherine, it's about 6 or 8 miles away from where the killings took place, with where the University of Washington is, where she was an advisor to him, PhD advisor to
PhD,
him.
right? Brian Koberger was his name.
Right.
Yeah,
And she was, yeah. So she didn't do any interviews. She opted not to because he was her student. But it's going to be interesting to what comes out afterward on this.
right. Wow. So check that out. Catherine Ramsland writing about this book, The First Lady of Murder. And the author again is Cathy Scott. The full title of the book is First Lady of Murder, Anne Rule's Life, Legacy, and the Serial Killer She Called Friend, out now, available. And the author again is Cathy Scott. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, William.
Thank you. Stay there.